on RealAgriculture.com is brought to you by Becker Underwood's Nodulator XL, DuPont Verticin Fungicide, and Saskatchewan Pulse Growers.
Well, there's several different types of ascochyta, and these would be some of the most important diseases that we look for on all of the different pulse crops. But it's important to note that each of the ascochytas on each of the pulse crops are different species, so they are host specific for each different one. The ascochyta or Microsphaerella blight on peas is probably the most common disease that we'll see on field peas in our disease surveys. Usually it's the Microsphaerella blight, which causes kind of the dark brown or purple lesions on the crop. But there's actually a complex of other ascochytas involved, and one of those is Ascochyta peasii. And this has more of tan or orange colored lesions, and we see this one actually more common in the south part of Saskatchewan and the southern parts of other provinces compared to the rest of the areas where Microsphaerella blight is the most dominant pathogen. But either way, we still treat these diseases the same, so it's important for breeders that might be looking at incorporating resistance genes. But for the farmers, if they're looking at just general management practices, we would treat these the same, especially when it comes to things like fungicides or seed treatments or what diseases are showing up in seed testing labs and things like that. When it comes to the other ascochytas, Ascochyta lentis on lentil crops has been in the past always a very important pathogen. We don't see quite as much Ascochyta as we have seen in the past before. We've done a lentil survey the last couple of years in Saskatchewan, and we seem to see more sclerotinia and botrytis and a new disease called Staphylium blight, as well as anthracnose showing up at higher levels than Ascochyta. But because it is a disease that has so much potential to cause damage, again, it's an example of where proper rotation is really important, because if we have better varieties with better resistance to Ascochyta, we want to make sure we can use those varieties for as long as possible. And so it's important to have a break in between our crops in order to give that disease a chance to break down. Ascochyta blight or Ascochyta rabii on chickpeas is a very aggressive disease. And this is one of the few examples where we almost always would recommend a farmer spray a fungicide application. Unless we have a very, very dry year where the weather will naturally control the disease, we almost always have some need for using a fungicide at least once and controlling this disease, because it can be very aggressive and can completely wipe out the crop. So these are the different ascochytas, probably the most important, especially on chickpeas and peas. It depends on the crop and the weather conditions and the disease. With a disease like Ascochyta blight on chickpeas, we would recommend spraying multiple times, just because it is so very aggressive and because it can continue to cause damage throughout the season. So this is an example of a disease that would be called polycyclic. So that means that there can be multiple disease cycles throughout the season. So we get the early development of the disease, and it produces spores on the plant, on the leaves or other parts of the plant, and then as these lesions expand and produce spores themselves, then those spores can spread to other parts of the plant and other parts of the crop. And this continues on and on as we have multiple disease cycles through the season. And because with something like Ascochyta rabii on chickpeas being so aggressive, then a multiple fungicide applications might be appropriate in this situation. But we should always be watching for the disease symptoms and watching the weather conditions to see, because these multiple disease cycles will only be able to perpetuate if we have the proper disease conditions. So for example, when it rains, the rain splash will spread the spores, and this is where we get the spread of the disease. So we'd want to mitigate that risk by using a properly timed fungicide. Of course, if we use multiple fungicide applications though within the season, we want to make sure to use different active ingredients so that we're not putting any pressure on the pathogens to select for resistance against the fungicides. If we use the same active ingredient over and over and over again, then we're just selecting out for the members of the pathogen that are able to survive, and then continuing to allow those to reproduce and create a population that the fungicide is really ineffective against. So those are some important things to think about if you're using a multiple fungicide application regime. And also just to think about when to stop as well. So once we get the canopies closed, and once we get flowers that are being produced that likely won't have time to actually produce seed, so later on in the season, we have to start thinking about when we'll draw the line and stop spraying. So if our goal is to protect the flowers and pulse crops, and those flowers need a certain amount of time in order to actually produce seed. So once it gets later on in the season where those flowers won't produce any yield, then it's not necessary to continue spraying, even though we might have some effect on the seed quality or the disease spreading on the pods and things like that. So we have to keep all of those different things in mind, and if we're using multiple applications, when to start and when to stop is really important.